We came to 1920. All right, 1920 was the big battle politically in the U.S. Between the sort of the Wilson branch of the Democratic Party. The Democratic candidate at that time was handpicked by Woodrow Wilson. It was Governor Cox of Ohio, was the Democratic candidate selected. He chose his best friend and good friend and great ally, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, a guy named Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And the battle in 1920, the election battle was, should we keep the tax rates high and pay off the wartime debt, so the argument went, or should we lower tax rates and get the economy growing and going again? You had Cox and Roosevelt versus Harding and Coolidge. Harding and Coolidge ran to cut tax rates down and get the growth back in the country. Return to normalcy was their slogan. Harding and Coolidge won the election. And I want to make sure you see these in current context, because the politics of the U.S. has never changed. Harding and Coolidge won the election by the largest percentage ever in U.S. history. They took the office, and of course they took the office in 1921. At that time, they lowered the tax rates. Now, if you know they're going to cut tax rates next year, what do you do this year? You do all you can to postpone your income so you can take advantage of the lower taxes. The same thing worked with Kennedy, the same thing worked with Reagan, and the same thing worked with Harding and Coolidge. So you can see there, as the tax rates came way down and you have a very bad economy. You have the post-World War I depression, recession, because of the delay in the tax cuts, and then you get this incredible boom. It was called the Roaring '20s. The U.S. economy boomed like never before until we get to 1929. I mean, you've got a really good economy with the low tax rates. It just is booming. 1929, we have something called the Smoot-Hawley tariff put in. It is the largest tax on traded products in U.S. history. It was passed by the House and the Senate in 1929, late in 1929, but everyone knew that Hoover loved it. Everyone knew that Hoover loved it. And you can see that the stock market crashes from its peak in September to December. It fell in that 3-month period by 35%. When we look at our whole drop recently is about 35% under this president. I mean, and then we start 1930. In 1930, in June of 1930, Hoover decides that he's going to sign the bill. He signs the bill. You know, you can't believe the precipitation of the Great Depression that came about from this horrendous tax increase. The stock market fell by 95% from peak to trough. The average stock, which went for $1 at the peak, was now selling for 5 cents. The average. Some were a little higher, a lot were a lot lower than that. The economy, the unemployment rate skyrocketed up. And what did Hoover do? Hoover, in his infinite wisdom, saw that the revenues were coming in short. Now remember, in those days, the taxes were not collected as you earned them, all right? They were not accrual basis. They were paid the year later in April. So whatever you earned in one year, you didn't pay any taxes until the next April. So they didn't realize their revenue shortfall. They had a huge shortfall. On January 1st, 1932, Herbert Hoover passed a tax increase. It was really a little later than that. They made it retroactive. They passed highest tax rate went from 25% to 63%. Is that a good enough increase for you? They raised all sorts of others. They put in the death tax. They put in the gift tax. They had corporate tax increase. I mean, there wasn't a tax they didn't see that they didn't want to raise, whether it flew, swam, whatever it did. They raised that tax. Needless to say, the economy spiraled down to the Great Depression. Unemployment rates 18, 19, 20%, even higher at some times there. Then we had the election. Roosevelt won the election in a landslide when he took office in 1933, in March of 1933. He did not raise the tax rates again, but he did something else. He put in the first U.S. wealth tax. We had something called the Bank Holiday Act of 1933, which is done in March of 1933, where I thought the Bank Holiday Act was just basically, he got a group of bankers together, they took a cruise down to the Bermudas and had a little fun, but no, that's not what happened. The Bank Holiday Act had four provisions. Number one, gold clauses in contracts, private or public, are voided, but the contract is still totally enforceable. Number two, Banks are no longer allowed to buy or sell specie. Now, remember back then it was gold coins, silver coins. We were on a gold standard, literally. So you could not take your checking account into the bank any longer and ask for gold to come back. That was illegal. You had to only get the paper back. That was what you were allowed to do. The other thing they did was they also made it illegal for banks to buy or sell foreign exchange, period. And the last thing they did, which is the crux of the matter, they required all Americans to turn in their gold into the Treasury. All Americans do. Criminal penalties for not doing it. Now, they gave you a little exception. I think each person was allowed to keep $100 worth of gold. Dentists were allowed to keep a little bit more, whatever a little bit more. But all Americans were, they took all that gold and all that specie, put it down in Fort Knox. Have any of you ever been to Fort Knox? Well, I've seen a couple of people who told me they were there, and I asked them, did you see the gold? No. I don't really know if it's there or not, but let's assume it is. They took all the gold out of the circulation for 6 months. They took it and they compensated all the people for the gold at $20.67 an ounce for the gold. That's what they paid them. 6 months later, they revalued gold from $20.67 an ounce to $35 an ounce. They devalued the US dollar against all foreign currencies by 60%. What they did was they basically confiscated all the gold from the US and gave them very little compensation in return. It was the first major wealth tax. It was a very large tax, and of course the economy just continues its desperate spiral downward.